Nuclear Energy, Key to Tomorrow. Produced by WQED for the Educational Television and Radio Center, in cooperation with the Westinghouse Electric Corporation and the Atomic Energy Commission. The subject, medicine. Your host, Dr. Warren F. Witzig, Manager Reactor Physics, Bettis Atomic Power Division.
Welcome to another discussion on nuclear energy, the key to tomorrow. Our topic for discussion this time is radioactivity in the field of medicine. You will recall that we have been talking about radioactivity itself and its applications also. Its applications in industry, in agriculture, and now we're going to talk about it in the field of medicine. You will remember from our discussion on radioactivity that there were two kinds of radioactivity, natural and man-made. The nuclear reactor, the nuclear energy, actually has brought about the production of most of the isotopes, the radioactive isotopes that's used in medicine today. Now, in this radioactivity, we concern ourselves with the energy of the particles. We concern ourselves with the half-life. And we find that we can actually take advantage of both of these characteristics of radioactivity in the application to the field of medicine. We also find that this application involves tracer techniques. And we can divide these techniques, if we choose, into two categories. One is in diagnosis, that is determining if we have some sort of physical difficulty. And another application is in research. And when we say research, we're talking about how do we work physically, what particular phenomenon in our bodily processes we can look at, research using tracer techniques. And then treatment. We're particularly privileged to be able to go into the laboratory of Dr. Campbell Moses, who is the director of the Addison H. Gibson Laboratory in the School of Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. But before we go into that laboratory, we're going to put on our film badge. We use this, you know, to monitor the amount of radiation that we receive in the laboratory. And now for Dr. Campbell. Let me introduce Dr. Campbell Moses. Dr. Moses, it's good to be with you.
Nice to see you.
Now, you're going to start out and tell us a little bit about this radioactivity, the energy situation, and the half-life picture.
Particularly as it relates to medicine and the application in medicine.
Yes.
With respect to the energy, you'll remember, Warren, that many radioisotopes, or all radioisotopes, give off rays of varying energies and varying strength, and two that are commonly used in medicine are radioactive iodine and radioactive phosphorus. Radioactive phosphorus is primarily a beta ray emitter, and this has a certain amount of penetration, certain degree of penetration, and I'd just like to demonstrate to you a little bit about the radiation that takes place and the energy that takes place with radioactive phosphorus.
Fine.
This is radioactive phosphorus in front of a Geiger tube, and you'll note that when we put a piece of cardboard in front of it, it very abruptly cuts down the radiation. In other words, the radioactive phosphorus penetrates but a few millimeters and can't penetrate through even such a thin item as the cardboard.
Mm-hmm.
Radioactive iodine, on the other hand, which is both a beta and a gamma emitter, the beta ray being the gentler one of the two, and the gamma ray penetrating more effectively. Notice that when we put this in front of it, and then put it cuts it down but not nearly to the degree that took place with the phosphors.
And we have still some of our gammas coming through.
Some of the hard gammas still get through. And this, of course, is what the Geiger counter detects. Now, this concept of depth of penetration is important because we trace molecules, radioactive molecules of any type, through the entire body by virtue of the ray that they give off. And by testing the chemical, the kind of chemical, and the quantity of radiation in any given chemical molecule, we're able to study, by tracer technique, the body's functions. The other concept about radiation that's important from a medical point of view is the concept of half-life. Every radioisotope has a decays at a physically predictable rate. And this rate we refer to as the half-life. One of our common isotopes, radioiodine, for example, has a half-life of 8 days. Iodine-131 has a half-life of 8 days. This means that in every 8-day period, it will decay 1/2 of its previous initial physical strength.
Yes.
Now here we have radioactivity. It's measured in counts per minute or any other arbitrary unit. And here, let's record along here time in days. Here, 4 days, 8 days, 12 days, 16 days. 4, 8, 12, and 16. If we start at this point with, let's say, 100 microcuries of radioiodine, a standard amount, in an 8-day period, that 100 microcuries will have decayed to 50 microcuries. And in 8 more days, it will have decayed to 25 microcuries. In other words, in every 8-day period, we have 50% less radioactivity than we had initially. Now, this is useful in medicine, and it's useful in the study of patients, and in the diagnosis and treatment of patients, because it enables us to have a built-in extinguishing apparatus. The radioisotope actually extinguishes itself so that this doesn't stay in the body and continue to exert radioactive effects. These two properties, the property of varying depth of penetration and varying half-life, provide advantages and provide problems. For example, with radioactive sodium, a very commonly used isotope in studies in circulation, radioactive sodium, sodium-24, has a half-life of about 65 hours. This means that it decays very rapidly and has to be used quickly before it gets into the circulation.
From where it's produced, the nuclear reactor,
That's right.
to where you use it, you must...
Takes a short period of
Right.
time. Now, a couple of the uses of radioisotopes in research, the tracer uses, we might talk about specifically.
All right, fine.
Here we have a situation with radioactive iron. I said a little while ago, and you introduced our discussion by indicating that we use radioisotopes to study bodily functions, the
Yes.
chemistry of the body with the tracer techniques. Iron is handled by the body and is used to synthesize hemoglobin, used to synthesize this material that's necessary for red blood cell oxygen capacity. Now, radioactive iron, or iron-59, is handled exactly like ordinary iron by the body. And so if we feed an animal radioactive iron in various chemical forms, we can study the rate at which this radio iron is handled by the various constituents of the body, the rate at which it appears in the red blood cells, the rate at which it appears in the liver, and other structures. This gives us an idea of the chemistry of iron in the body. A very useful technique. Another one uses radioactive carbon. Now, radioactive carbon is a beta emitter. Gives off a pure beta, a relatively soft beta.
By that we mean very low energy.
Very low energy, very low energy. And the radioactive carbon, if we feed a chemical material that might be likely to cause cancer or be related to cancer or useful in the treatment of cancer, if we feed this material with a little radioactive carbon incorporated into the molecule, we then are able to take samples, for example, from the blood, from the urine, or from the skin, or from other tissues, and to study the exact chemical material in which the radioactive carbon was incorporated. This is a useful way to trace the chemistry of the body. And radioactive carbon has been very useful from a research point of view. From a point of view of clinical activity, we use radioactive iodine, particularly to study thyroid function.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we might actually have a patient that was given radioiodine about 6 hours ago and use Miss Warden, if she's willing, to demonstrate this. Miss Warden, Dr. Whitsey.
Pleased to meet you, Miss Warden.
We're interested in studying the thyroid function in Miss Warden, and radioiodine is handled by the body exactly like normal iodine. So happens one of the functions of the thyroid gland is to concentrate iodine. We gave Miss, if you just stand a little bit closer, that's it. We gave Miss Warden a dose of radioactive iodine about 6 hours ago. And now we're going to see how much of this radioiodine has been incorporated in her thyroid gland. And we do this by positioning her in front of this scintillation detector. This is a sodium iodide, a thallium-activated sodium iodide crystal here in the lead shield with a photomultiplier tube behind it. And we'll measure the gamma rays that are given off by the radioiodine that's been trapped in her thyroid. Let's just do this now. Hold still, Miss Warden. And you'll note from the changes in the register that we're recording the gamma rays that are being given off by this radioiodine. Depending on how active the thyroid is, more or less of this radioiodine will be trapped in a given unit of time. If the thyroid's overactive, it'll trap more iodine. If it's less active, it'll trap less. All right? Now, let's do the same thing here with a lead shield in front of her gland. You hold that. It's very heavy, Miss Warden. She'll hold that, and we'll be able to see how much radiation is actually coming from the gland. This separates the background. This is a so-called...
Tell the natural radioactivity from the radioactive iodine.
That's right. And we'll be able to tell from these two readings, subtracting the background, that is with the heavy lead shield in front of it,
yes.
Subtracting these counts, we'll be able to tell.
And we can see that there's much less radioactivity.
That's right.
Than before.
Because it's stopped by the heavy lead shield.
All right.
Now, if you just stop at this instant. Thank you, Miss Warden. Thank you very much. We'll do a little arithmetic on her counting rates and be able to plot these for her. Now, the normal thyroid pickup is something in this order, in this particular laboratory. The normal radioiodine pickup being anywhere up to 25 or 30% in our usual 6-hour time.
Now let's see, we're plotting here the amount of radioactive iodine.
This is percent of the administered amount of iodine. In other words, this is the percent of iodine that we gave her 6 hours ago.
Against time.
Against time
as
along
it builds
this
up
was about 6 hours.
In the thyroid.
That's right. Now, in our particular setup, and this varies for every laboratory, about 25 to 30% is the normal range. The hyperthyroid one will pick up considerably more than this. Something like this. This is a fine pencil.
You're having trouble. It goes up then much higher.
That's right. And the
3 or 4 times.
That's right. And the very inactive thyroid person has a very flat curve. This is now, as we look at the figures that we had on Miss Warden, and look at our scale here, her reading comes just like this, which is in our normal range. This is a normal pickup for radioactive iodine in a normal person.
So she has no problems in this area.
She has no problems in this area. We won't speak for every other area. We use the tracer technique in another kind of cancer, another kind of thyroid problem, thyroid cancer. I said that the thyroid traps radioiodine. This is one of its functions. The thyroid cancer also traps iodine. And wherever thyroid cancer may have spread in the body, we can, by giving a dose of radioiodine, just like we did to Miss Warden, and then surveying the entire body, we can detect wherever the radioiodine may have spread. In other words, where the thyroid cancer may have spread. Now, in the model here, we have a simulated iodine source behind his shoulder. And as we survey his body, we find the radioiodine is diffusely distributed through his body, but very much concentrated in the area where the thyroid cancer has spread.
Yes.
And this is the situation in patients with thyroid cancer, that the radioiodine may, or the thyroid cancer may have spread any place, and wherever it's spread, the radioiodine will be localized and can be detected with such a detector as this scintillation counter. The usefulness of radioiodine in diagnosing wherever thyroid cancer may have spread is also applied in the treatment of thyroid cancer. There are some kinds, unfortunately not all kinds of thyroid cancer, but there's some kinds of thyroid cancer that pick up a good deal of radioiodine. When this is the case, we give a large dose of radioiodine, and this then will go to wherever the cancer has spread. We call this metastases, these metastases, wherever it's spread, and will locally lodge there and kind of act as a built-in X-ray machine to irradiate and treat the cancer wherever it might be.
All right, then, Campbell, we're getting into sort of the treatment area now. And supposing we recap then just for a moment. We've talked about radioactivity. We're using in this field of medicine almost exclusively artificial radioactivity. And we are concentrating on the use of rays of different amounts of energy for local and for deep-seated kind of difficulties. And we also take advantage of this half-life characteristic to have radiation decay and then no longer produce radiation effects or radiation damage. And then we've gone on and seen how radioactivity has been applied to tracer work. Tracer for diagnosis and also tracer for research in how we tick. Then there is the third prominent field in medicine, and that is the treatment. And for that, Dr. Moses has several things to tell us.
Well, Warren, in treatment, just as in the tracer and other and research uses of radioisotopes, we use particularly the principles of energy of the radioisotope molecule, that is, its penetration, and the concept of half-life. The usefulness of, we take advantage of the lack of penetration, if you will, of certain radioisotopes in the treatment of one interesting kind of eye problem. You recall that the eye consists of a cornea, the clear window-like structure at the front of the eye, and the eyeball with a lens somewhere behind it. Well, now, in accidents where glass may enter the eye or where the surgeon, for some reason or other, must operate on the eye, we have an incision often made in this clear cornea, the window of the eye. Nature, in healing this, causes a myriad of blood vessels to grow in and literally cloud and obscure this cornea, this window. And the window then is not clear. To correct this, the ophthalmologist uses radioactive strontium. Radioactive strontium has is a beta emitter, and it penetrates but a fraction of a millimeter, and they place it directly on the eye, and it will destroy those tiny blood vessels that have clouded the window of the eye, and this, of course, is useful in maintaining perfect vision. So radioactive strontium, we take advantage of its beta ray, its soft ray, the ray that doesn't penetrate very far. Now, in the treatment of deep-seated kinds of cancer, in the treatment, for example, of a cancer of the lung, which may be well down toward the middle of the body, we need a ray that penetrates more deeply. And for this purpose, frequently radioactive cobalt is used, so-called cobalt-60. And cobalt-60 is used in a particular way that really facilitates the treatment of patients. This is a model of it.
This is a cobalt irradiation
This is a cobalt irradiation unit. And a little later we'll demonstrate this, an actual patient in one of these units to you. But here we have a table on which the patient may be placed. We have the cobalt source here in a small disc, and we have this heavy baffle or primary shield on the other side. Now, this whole unit may be rotated around the patient, or indeed it may be oscillated in this way so that the patient can, any part of the patient's body may be treated. Now let me just show you a little bit about how we go about treating patients with this kind of instrument. We first localize within their body where the tumor may be. And if this is a cross-section of a person about like this,
The chest, yes.
with the chest, and this their backbone, and this their breastbone here, we know that the lungs fill both chest cavities, something like this. And let's say we're cut through at the level here, and at this point we have a cancer or tumor growing. By localizing this by X-ray, it's possible to directly note exactly where the rays from this cobalt irradiator would strike the patient, and to position the patient, to position the angle of the oscillator and the angle of the rotational unit in such a way that we will go directly to the site of the tumor without irradiating a lot of adjacent structures. Now, radioactive cobalt has some advantages that are the direct result of its tremendous depth of penetration, its high energy. It's about equivalent to 3 million volt X-ray energy. And one of these advantages is that the radiation effect does not take place on the skin, but rather takes place more deeply in the body. You remember that radiation effects are primarily noted where the energy is absorbed. And if it's absorbed in the skin, it's the X-ray effect on the skin that determines how much X-ray dosage can be given. This is the cobalt irradiator. The functional portion of this unit is this large lead container, the cobalt head, with the radioactive cobalt in its center. There's a shuttering device on the undersurface of this head which moves back and forth and opens and closes the lead container. When the shutter is open, a beam emerges from this area and it is used to treat the patient. Everything else you see in this assembly is utilized to rotate the cobalt source around the patient, to direct the beam, and to protect the occupants of the room surrounding the patient. This is the counterweight. This thick-wall lead container actually weighs 2 tons. In order to propel it around the patient, it is necessary to counterbalance it. And this portion of the machine is used as a counterweight. The counterweight has an even more important function. It absorbs the primary cobalt beam when that beam emerges from the patient, or if there's no patient in the room, at any time when the shutter is open. This counterweight will absorb most of the primary beam from cobalt, and thus we are able to keep the amount of protection in the walls down to an absolute minimum. For example, these walls in this room have no lead in them whatever, and the thickest wall contains 21 inches of concrete. The thinnest wall, 8 inches of concrete. This adequately and completely protects the occupants of the room around this cobalt irradiator. The large hood in the back of the treatment table houses 9 electric motors which are used to put the machine through the motions of which it is capable. This is a cross-section of a patient and shows in the cross-hatched area the actual location of the tumor within this patient. The radius of the circle through which the cobalt will rotate is 75 centimeters. So, when the table is up at this height, the tabletop is at the exact center of the axis of rotation. If we know the distance between the back of the patient and the location of the tumor which we are treating, we can get that tumor at the center of the axis of rotation by merely raising or lowering the table the same number of centimeters as the distance between the tumor and the back of the patient. This places the tumor at the center of the axis of rotation in the horizontal projection. It is then only necessary to center the tumor in the vertical position. This is done by placing the counterweight in an exact horizontal position and using the light localizer. This is the X on the patient locating the spot of the tumor. The light is then projects onto the patient at the exact site where the cobalt beam will strike. If we have the center of the field we wish to treat marked, we then line up the light in the center of the X and have the patient in the exact position for accurate treatment. From now on, all of the patient's treatment will be by remote control, operating from a control panel outside the room. The control panel permits one to rotate the irradiator about the patient and permits one to oscillate the arc at right angles to the axis of rotation. Indeed, we're even able to rotate through any segment of a circle that we choose. These dials will follow the rotation of the cobalt head about the patient so that the operator can at all times know the position of the irradiation unit about the patient. In addition, if we wish the shutter on the irradiator to be closed during any part of the rotation, we set the unit to automatically close the shutter so that we can spare any part of the body from irradiation that we may choose. Actually, there is very little difference between a cobalt irradiator and a deep therapy X-ray generator. In the case of the cobalt irradiator, we are obtaining the rays we use for treatment from the radioactive cobalt. In deep X-ray therapy, we are actually generating X-rays by means of electricity. The rays which are obtained from radioactive cobalt are roughly equal to the energy of the rays generated by an X-ray machine which is operating at 3 million volts. The average X-ray therapy unit found in most hospitals and private radiological offices operates at about 250,000 volts. The greater energy of the radiation beam from cobalt makes it possible to treat deeper cancers without producing much damage to the normal tissues above and around the cancer we are treating. The beam is actually so powerful that it is able to penetrate through the skin without being absorbed too significantly by the skin. Most of its absorption occurs about 5 millimeters under the skin so that we can deliver high doses of irradiation to the tumor without damaging the skin. The beam of energy that it will literally plows forward through the tissues rather than scatter out to the sides. This dial now is following the location of the irradiation unit about the patient.
Well, Dr. Moses, I want to thank you for having us in your laboratory for this discussion on radioactivity in the field of medicine.
It's a pleasure.
And you will recall that radioactivity is just one of these many developments in the field of nuclear energy, the key to tomorrow.
Nuclear Energy, Key to Tomorrow. Produced by WQED for the Educational Television and Radio Center, in cooperation with the Westinghouse Electric Corporation and the Atomic Energy Commission. The subject, medicine. Your host, Dr. Warren F. Witzig, Manager Reactor Physics, Bettis Atomic Power Division. Special guest, Dr. Campbell Moses, Director of Addison H. Gibson Laboratory, School of Medicine, University of Pittsburgh. Technical advisor for the series, Mr. Edward R. Sanford. Engineering supervision by Frank Stuckman and Stephen Zorbas. Production and direction for the series by John W. Ziegler and Robert E. Potts. This is National Educational Television.